8? Perfect. Because back in the 1700s, late 1700s, when we had our Navy, we had boys on board the ship from the ages of 8 to 16. Their parents would enlist them in the Navy. Do you guys think they kept their paycheck? Yeah. They sure didn't. Went right back to their parents because poverty was so high. Everyone was poor back then. So your paycheck wasn't even going in your pocket. Went back to mom and dad.
We do that now. I told them they would have been first rate at climbing up the mast.
Yep.
They're great.
You would have been a powder passer. That would have been your. That would have been basically your main job. But a lot of boys were taken under the wing of midshipmen and officers, and later on became midshipmen and officers themselves, which is not a bad gig, especially back then. And no matter what job you did, it helped you later in life back then because, finding a good trade and getting steady money was very hard. So to be able to be in the Navy at such a young age, you gained a lot of trades that would help you later on. And you might not be so poor after all. So be thankful for what you have nowadays. All right, everybody, welcome down to the berth deck. Now, has anybody seen the movie Master and Commander by any chance? All right, for those of you who have, the opening scene of that movie is a perfect depiction of what it would be like on a berth deck on a ship like this. Now, for those of you who haven't, that movie opens up. You see the hammocks swaying back and forth. You see the water dripping from the decks above. It's extremely dark because there is no lighting. It's very dirty looking, musty. They didn't really bathe very often. I know you can't get that from the movie, but they didn't bathe very often, so it was very stinky down here. Overall, unpleasant living conditions. Perfect. That's exactly how it was down here. That movie did it very spot on. Now these portholes that you see on the sides of the ship that allow a little bit of ventilation and some light, those were not added until 1810. So from the ship's launching in 1797 up to that point, zero ventilation and zero light down here. Even with those, it really does not add that much, but it's definitely a lot more refreshing than how it was. Now at any given time, there was around 220 crew members sleeping down here. They would work 20-hour work days and get a great night's rest of 4 hours. The enlisted members would come down and hang up their hammocks on their assigned hooks. The higher ranking enlisted you were, the farther aft and outboard you would sleep, due to the fact they had an extra inch or so of elbow room, kind of the perks of being higher ranking. Now the lower ranking enlisted slept farther forward and inboard. Now not only did they have less elbow room, but they had to deal with all the germs as well, because in front of the hammocks is where sick bay would be held, and the only way they separated the sick from the healthy crew members is by putting up a thin canvas sheet. Now all the way back aft, there's a cabin-like structure back there that is called the wardroom. That is where 25 to 30 midshipmen and officers would live. Now each officer was assigned a stateroom the size of a broom closet. In this broom closet, they would have a hanging cot, a desk to do their work, and also a coat rack. Doesn't sound very luxurious, but I guarantee you it was the Marriott compared to the slums. So it was, they had their own privacy, and it was a lot nicer than swaying side by side with 100 other stinky dudes. In between these two groups, you would have 50 to 55 Marines on board the ship. Now the Marines, what did I hear? Oh boy. I'm just kidding. Department of the Navy, by the way. Men's department. Now, threw me off my game. Now, the Marines on board the ship served a few purposes, not the most important ones, I'm just kidding. They actually were very helpful. They were the security force of the ship, and during engagements, they served two very important causes. And what that was is they served as snipers up on the mast. Did anybody see the white platforms on the mast? Those are called fighting tops. You would have about 5 Marines on each of those fighting tops. Only one on each was the actual sniper, where the other 4 was constantly reloading the gun, so he had an endless supply to shoot at the enemy. The other purpose they served during an engagement, if we got close enough and had damaged the enemy ship enough to where our captain felt we could board her, the Marines were in charge of forming those boarding parties. So they had very important jobs, actually. And I'm actually going to mention a Marine later on. It's a sad thing, but it's very important as well. Now, while we're down here, we're going to go over some of the construction features as well. One of the first things I'm sure you all noticed, especially for the gentleman that bumped his head, were these very low overheads. We like to tell people, you know, the ship is built for strength, not for comfort. These low overheads is a perfect example of that. There's a lot of weight on board that needs to be displaced. These low overheads, along with these white pillars that you see on the sides, help do that. Those white pillars are called standing knees. Now they are placed underneath each one of those 5,800-pound long guns that I spoke about earlier. Now if those were not in place, the guns would not necessarily come crashing through the decks, but they do help displace that weight and provide structural integrity for the decks above and below us. Now below us is the orlop deck. Now orlop stands for overlapping because there's a couple different levels to that one deck. All the way up forward you have the sail loft where the extra sail supplies and tools would be kept. All the way back aft is the surgeon's cockpit. Now if you think the overheads here are bad, in the surgeon's cockpit the surgeries would be done on their knees because you cannot stand upright down there whatsoever. In between these two areas you have the hold of the ship where all the barrels of food and water would be kept, and it would be jam-packed. Couldn't even crawl down there. Now on the bottom of the ship you have the keel, which serves as the backbone of the ship. Then you have a very innovative design at the time called diagonal riders. Now the diagonal riders came off the keel forward and aft diagonally to help displace the weight and also help prevent something called hogging. Has anybody heard the term hogging before? Hogging is the bending of the ship forward and aft. If those diagonal riders were not in place, the ship would just bend over time until it would snap in half. Now there was a time in the ship's history she went into dry dock. They removed those diagonal riders, not thinking they were that important. They were wrong. Years later she came back into the dry dock and they realized that the hogging was almost to the point of no return. Thankfully they caught it when they did. The diagonal riders are back in place and she's still here today for everybody to enjoy. Now the last construction feature down here are these puzzle-like pieces. This is just one of them right here. If you look throughout the decks in random areas, you will see them. Something called lock scarping. Lock scarping was designed to provide lateral stability for the ship to ensure these deck planks weren't bouncing around and whatnot. Now, the construction of the ship actually plays a very important role in how she gained her nickname, Old Ironsides. We're actually going to head back up one deck only to the gun deck, all the way on the back, on the aft end, to go over how she gained her nickname during one of her most famous engagements with the HMS Guerriere. So if you guys want to use these floor laterals to head back up, and I will meet you up there.
Where did they put their stuff?
After the tour, if you'd like, I can show you something. Because with the restoration, they're